Hey, welcome back. Or if this is your first time here, stay. You've arrived at a place where we overthink things, just in a slightly more organized way. I'm Alex, I'm 25, and today we're talking about something very familiar, overthinking, but not in a dramatic, this is ruining your life way. More like understanding it properly. Overthinking has a bad reputation. People say things like, you think too much, just relax, stop overanalyzing. And on the surface it sounds like good advice, but it's also a bit unrealistic. Because thinking deeply is not the problem. In fact, overthinking often means something quite positive. It means you're aware, you notice details, you reflect, you care about what you say and how you act. That's not a weakness, that's sensitivity combined with intelligence. The real issue isn't that you think too much, it's that you treat every thought as if it's important. And that's where things become a little complicated. Because not all thoughts are equal. Some thoughts are useful, they help you understand situations, make decisions, learn from experience. But some thoughts are just noise, and your brain doesn't always tell you which is which. It presents everything in the same tone, like, this is very important, you should worry about this immediately, even when the thought is something like, did that message sound strange? Or, should I have said something differently? Or, did that person misunderstand me? Now here's the interesting part. Most of the time, nothing actually went wrong, but your brain doesn't focus on reality. It focuses on possibility. It asks, what if this was a problem? And suddenly you're not dealing with what happened, you're dealing with what could have happened. And that's where overthinking starts to feel exhausting. Not because you're thinking, but because you're trying to solve situations that don't exist. Take a simple example. You send a message, a normal message, clear, polite, nothing unusual. Then a few minutes pass. No reply. At this point, reality is very simple. They haven't answered yet. That's it. But your mind doesn't stop there. It starts exploring possibilities. Maybe they didn't like the tone. Maybe it sounded too direct. Maybe they think something else now. And within a few minutes, a completely neutral situation starts to feel uncomfortable. But here's the quiet truth. Most people are not analyzing your message. They're busy living their own lives, thinking their own thoughts, often overthinking something about themselves. So what feels like a big moment in your mind is usually just a small detail in reality. And this is where perspective changes everything. Overthinking is not your enemy. It's just a tool that's working without a filter. Your brain is doing its job. It's trying to predict, prepare, protect. But it doesn't always know when to stop. So instead of trying to stop thinking, you can start choosing what deserves your attention. Imagine your thoughts like voices in a room. Some are calm and clear, some are loud and dramatic, and some are just talking because they can. You don't need to listen to all of them. When a thought appears, you can pause and ask, is this useful or just noise? If it's useful, you can reflect on it. If it's not, you can let it pass, not by forcing it away, just by not giving it importance. Because attention is powerful. Whatever you focus on grows. If you focus on small doubts, they become bigger. If you focus on clarity, things feel simpler. And this doesn't mean you suddenly become calm all the time. That's not realistic. You'll still have moments where your mind starts creating stories, but the difference is you won't believe every story. You'll notice it, almost like watching your thoughts from a small distance. There it is again, that overthinking pattern. And instead of reacting immediately, you pause. That pause changes everything, because in that space, you have a choice. You can continue the cycle, or you can step out of it. And often, stepping out is surprisingly simple. You return to what is real, not what might happen, not what could go wrong, but what is actually happening right now. Maybe you're sitting somewhere, maybe you're listening to this and thinking quietly. Maybe nothing dramatic is happening at all, and that's okay. Life is not made of constant intensity. It's made of small, steady moments, and your mind doesn't need to control all of them. Sometimes it's enough to just experience them without analysis, without correction, without trying to improve every detail. Because not everything needs to be optimized. Some things just need to be lived. So if you find yourself overthinking later today, don't fight it. Just notice it, and maybe for a moment, choose not to follow it. So let's keep going, because there's another layer to this, and this one becomes almost funny once you start noticing it. Up to now, we've been talking about thoughts as something you can observe, something you don't have to follow every time. But here's the part people often miss. Overthinking is not really about thinking too much. It's about trying to feel certain all the time. And certainty is very addictive. If certainty were a product, your brain would subscribe to it. upgrade it, and still complain about the lack of extra features. Your mind doesn't like unfinished situations. It doesn't like not knowing. It doesn't like ambiguity. Ambiguity feels uncomfortable, like when someone reads your message and doesn't reply. Nothing serious happened, but your brain reacts like this is now a personal mystery that must be solved immediately. So when something is unclear, even slightly, your brain tries to complete it. It wants to close the loop, finish the story, give you an answer. Even if that answer is completely invented, you send a message, a normal message, clear, polite, nothing dramatic. Then there's silence. Reality is simple. They haven't replied yet. That's it. That's the whole situation. But your brain doesn't accept that. It opens multiple scenarios at once. Maybe they didn't like it. Maybe it sounded strange. Maybe I used the wrong words. Maybe I am the wrong words. At this point, your brain is not analyzing a message. It's producing a full drama series with emotional complexity and absolutely no confirmed facts. Meanwhile, the other person is probably just busy, or eating, or watching something, or forgot to reply like a completely normal human being. And somehow your brain has already created a social crisis out of a delay. That's the interesting part. Overthinking feels like problem solving, but most of the time it's just discomfort with not knowing. You're not solving real problems, you're solving imaginary versions of reality that may never exist. It's like rehearsing a conversation in your head and still losing the argument. No one else is there, but somehow you feel like you need to apologize. So the goal is not to stop thinking. That doesn't work. If you try to stop thinking, your brain immediately becomes more active, like it just received a very important assignment. The goal is to become okay with not having an answer right now. That sounds simple, but your brain reacts like you just told it to function without the internet. No connection, no explanation, no conclusion. It starts searching aggressively for meaning. But here's the thing, life is full of unfinished situations. Messages without replies, conversations without clear endings, moments that don't make sense immediately. If your brain tries to solve all of them, you'll be mentally busy all day without actually moving forward. So instead of trying to complete everything, you pause and say, I don't know yet. And then you do something very unusual. You leave it there. No extra story, no immediate conclusion, just space. At first, that feels uncomfortable. Your brain will say, no, we need to figure this out right now. But most things don't become clearer because you think more. They become clearer because you give them time. Trying to force clarity is like trying to remember something by stressing about it. The harder you try, the further it goes. And then later, when you're doing something completely unrelated, your brain suddenly gives you the answer like it deserves recognition. It's helpful, but also slightly late, and this connects to something else. Overthinking creates an illusion of control. It feels like if you think about something enough, you'll manage it better. But most of the time, you're not controlling anything. You're just imagining different outcomes. You're in one moment, but your mind is exploring multiple futures, each one with its own emotions, its own reactions, its own unnecessary stress. So externally, nothing is happening, but internally, it feels like a lot. It's like having 10 conversations in your head at the same time, and none of them are real. That's why it feels exhausting. Not because thinking is difficult, but because you're thinking about too many versions of reality at once. So instead of trying to manage all of them, you come back to one. The one that is actually happening right now. Right now is usually simple. Not perfect, but manageable. And that's enough. There's also something else we need to talk about, and that's overthinking the past. This is a classic situation, replaying a conversation again and again like it's an important historical event. Why did I say that? I should have said something else. That sounded strange. First of all, no one else is thinking about it. The other person is probably thinking about something they said. Everyone is busy analyzing their own life. Second, replaying the moment doesn't change anything. It just makes you feel worse now. It's like watching the same scene repeatedly and expecting a different ending. So here's a useful distinction. There's reflection and there's rumination. Reflection is calm. You look at something, you understand it, and you move on. Rumination is repetitive. You go over the same thing again and again without reaching a conclusion. Same situation, different approach. Once you notice that, you can step out of the loop. Not perfectly, not immediately, but gradually. You can recognize when your brain is just repeating itself and say, we've already thought about this. Another important thing is this, you don't need to understand everything immediately. Some things become clear later, some things never fully make sense. And that's fine. We often expect instant clarity, but real clarity takes time. It develops naturally, not under pressure. So if something feels unclear, it doesn't mean there's a problem. It just means it's not ready yet. And there's something surprisingly calm about that. Being able to say, I don't fully understand this yet, and that's okay. That's not weakness, that's stability, because now you're not rushing to create answers. You're allowing things to unfold. And when you do that, overthinking becomes less intense. Not completely gone, but lighter, more manageable. And maybe that's the point. Not to eliminate overthinking, but to stop letting it control everything. Because your thoughts are part of you, but they're not all of you. And once you see that, it becomes easier to let some of them pass without following them. So next time your brain starts creating a whole story from a small moment, you can pause and think, this is getting a bit dramatic. Not in a critical way, just in a realistic way. And then you don't have to continue the story. Because not every thought needs to become something bigger. Some thoughts can just exist and then disappear. And honestly, that's a lot more peaceful than trying to solve everything all the time. So if later today you catch yourself overthinking again, just notice it. Maybe even smile a little, like, here we go again. And then you don't have to follow it, because not every thought needs a response. So let's continue from that idea, because this is where things start to become a bit more real. Overthinking is not just about thoughts, it's also about trust. Not trust in other people, but trust in yourself. Because if you think about it, a lot of overthinking is actually an attempt to prepare for every possible situation in advance. It's like your brain is trying to rehearse life before it happens, just to make sure you don't make mistakes. And on the surface, that sounds responsible, even smart. But in reality, it creates pressure, because life doesn't follow your rehearsals. You can imagine 10 different versions of a conversation, and then the real one will still surprise you. You can think through every possible outcome, and then something completely unexpected will happen anyway. And at that point, all that preparation doesn't feel helpful. It just feels like you spent a lot of energy trying to control something that was never fully controllable in the first place. And this is where trust becomes important. Because if you trust that you can respond in the moment, you don't need to predict everything. You don't need to prepare for every reaction. You don't need to control every detail. You can simply show up, be present, and deal with things as they come. That doesn't mean everything will be perfect. It won't. There will be awkward moments, unclear moments, moments where you don't say exactly the right thing. But that's normal. That's part of being human, not a mistake you need to eliminate. And here's something interesting. Most of the moments you overthink are not actually important moments. They feel important because you are focusing on them. But if you look at your life over a longer period of time, most of these small interactions disappear. They don't define anything. They don't change your direction, they don't create long-term consequences, they just happen and then they're gone. But in the moment, your brain treats them like they're significant. Like this one sentence, this one reaction, this one pause will somehow change everything. And that's simply not true. Life is not that fragile. One small moment does not determine everything, but your brain prefers to act like it does because that creates a sense of urgency, and urgency feels like control. And this is where a bit of humor helps, because if you step back for a second, some of these thoughts are actually quite dramatic. You think, that sounded strange, and suddenly your brain goes, yes, and now your entire personality has been exposed. That's not analysis, that's imagination, and not even accurate imagination, just very confident imagination. Your brain is like a storyteller that doesn't always check facts. It just creates a version that feels convincing. And the more you listen to it without questioning, the more real it feels. But once you start noticing that pattern, you can't really unsee it. You start catching your thoughts in the moment, not stopping them, just noticing them. You notice how quickly a simple situation becomes a complex story. You notice how your mind fills in gaps with assumptions. You notice how it tries to protect you from uncertainty by creating explanations, even if those explanations are not based on reality. And that awareness changes everything. Not because your thoughts disappear, but because they lose some of their authority. They stop feeling like absolute truth. They start feeling like suggestions. And that's a very different experience, because now you can choose, you can follow the thought, or you can let it pass. Not in a forced way, just naturally. And this is where things become a bit lighter. Not perfect, not completely calm, but lighter. Because now you're not reacting to every single thought. You're observing more, reacting less. And that creates space. Space in your mind, space in your reactions, space in your experience. And in that space, something interesting happens. You become more present. Not in a dramatic, life-changing way, just in a simple way. You start noticing what is actually happening instead of what might happen. You start responding to real situations instead of imagined ones, and that changes how things feel. Because real situations are usually simpler than imagined ones. They're not always easy, but they're not as complex as the versions your brain creates. And that simplicity is something you can rely on. Another thing that helps is realizing that not everything needs to be improved. This is a big one, especially if you're used to analyzing yourself a lot. You think every interaction can be better, every sentence can be improved, every reaction can be optimized. And while that sounds like growth, it can also become pressure, because now nothing is ever enough. Every moment becomes something to fix. And that creates constant tension, because you're never just experiencing something, you're always evaluating it. But not everything needs improvement. Some things are fine as they are. Some conversations are just conversations. Some moments are just moments. They don't need to be analyzed, corrected, or optimized. And once you allow that, things feel more relaxed. Not because everything is perfect, but because you stop trying to make everything perfect. And that's a very different mindset. There's also something else that becomes clear over time. People are not as focused on you as you think. Not in a negative way, just realistically. Everyone is dealing with their own thoughts, their own concerns, their own version of overthinking. So while you're analyzing what you said, they're analyzing what they said. While you're thinking about how you were perceived, they're thinking about how they were perceived. And in that sense, everyone is a bit distracted. And that's actually a good thing, because it means the pressure is lower than it feels. You don't have to perform perfectly, you don't have to manage every impression, you just have to be present enough. And that's a much simpler requirement. So if you take all of this together, the idea becomes very clear. Overthinking is not something you need to eliminate, it's something you need to understand. Because once you understand it, it becomes less intense, less convincing, less controlling. It becomes something that happens in the background, not something that defines your experience. And that's enough. You don't need complete silence in your mind. You don't need perfect clarity all the time. You just need a bit more space between your thoughts and your reactions. And in that space, things start to change naturally. You feel less pressure, less urgency, less need to solve everything immediately. You become more flexible, more present, more relaxed in how you deal with situations. And that doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual. You notice one thought, then another, then another. You pause sometimes, not always. You let things pass sometimes, not always. But even that is progress. So if later today your mind starts building another story, another explanation, another version of reality, you don't need to stop it completely. You can just notice it, recognize it, and maybe, just maybe, not follow it all the way. Because not every thought needs your full attention, and not every situation needs a complete explanation right now. Some things can stay unfinished for a while, and that's completely okay. So let's slowly bring this to a close. If there's one thing to take from all of this, it's not that you should stop overthinking, because that's not realistic. Your mind will keep doing what it's designed to do. Analyze, predict, imagine, and sometimes overdo all three at the same time. But maybe now it feels a bit different. Maybe now, instead of believing every thought immediately, you can pause for a second, just enough to notice it, just enough to create a little space. And in that space, things start to change. You don't have to react to everything. You don't have to solve everything. And you definitely don't have to understand everything right now. Some things can stay incomplete. Some moments can just pass, and some thoughts can exist and then disappear. That doesn't mean you're ignoring your life, it means you're allowing it to unfold instead of trying to control every detail. And honestly, life tends to work better that way. A bit less pressure, a bit more presence, and a bit more trust that you'll figure things out as they come, because you always have, even if it didn't feel perfect at the time. So next time your mind starts building another story, another explanation, another what if, you can notice it, maybe even smile a little and think, here we go again. Not as a problem, just as something familiar, and then you can gently come back to what's actually happening right now, because most of the time, right now is manageable, simple, and real, and that's enough. Alright, I'll leave you with that, and if your brain decides to analyze this entire episode later, don't worry, mine would too. Just remember, not every thought needs a response. And if you enjoyed this episode, or at least overthought it slightly less than usual, you can subscribe. No pressure. I mean, unless your brain is already thinking, should I subscribe? What if I don't have time? What if Alex posts too often? Relax, it's just a button, not a lifetime commitment. You can always unsubscribe, but your overthinking is probably staying. So you might as well keep me around too. See you in the next one. See you.